Hey, Documentary First listeners. I am excited to announce that our podcast is now officially sponsored by our friends over at Artillery Sports. And the Artillery Sports 5-star series pickleballs have now arrived. But here's the most important part, and it's what I absolutely love. With each purchase, 20% of the profits are donated to organizations that help military veterans get low or no cost healthcare. So head on over to artillerysports.com right now and use the code DOCFIRST to get 10% off your first order. Welcome to Documentary First, an inside look at documentary filmmaking. I'm your host and a documentary filmmaker, Christian Taylor. My co-host, Jason Rugg, is out again this week, but he assures me he'll be back very soon with some interesting and exciting updates in his own career. We miss you, Jason, and we're cheering you on. Can't wait to have you back. This week, we are thrilled to welcome back to the show the founder of People's TV and director of two new amazing documentaries, Minted, which he's here to talk about today, and I'm told has some exciting news for us, and Not Going Quietly, which has recently been honored with 2 News and Documentary Emmy nominations, and it has received 3 IDA nominations and a nomination for the Critics' Choice Documentary Awards. At South by Southwest, Not Going Quietly won the Audience Award and Special Jury Prize, and filmmakers were honored when the doc was screened at an official selection at the Tribeca Film Festival. He was here earlier in the year, episode 211, if you haven't heard it, talking about Not Going Quietly. So if you haven't listened to that episode, absolutely go do that. Nick, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Christian. It's great to be back. I love your enthusiasm and passion for this very niche subject of documentary film. It's great.
Yeah, it's really great. It's nice to have you here. I love the great documentary work that you're doing. I really enjoyed this film, Minted. It's so fascinating, and I learned so much from it. I'm looking forward to diving in and learning a little bit more. This is the second time you've been here. It's been a little while since we saw you. So talk to me a little bit about what's been going on. The last time we talked to you, we talked about Not Going Quietly, and some things have happened since Not Going Quietly. Why don't you update us a little bit since our last podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was great to be talking to you then. And I can't remember the exact chronology or dates in terms of when we recorded and how things passed. But the very sad news is that in November of 23, Adi Barkan, who is the protagonist of Not Going Quietly, passed away due to complications from ALS, which was always, I think, expected in some ways, but was also very sudden and shocking to his family and to his friends and to me. And there was a very powerful and beautiful memorial service for him in January, and many politicians came and attended that, and celebrities and actors. And it was really nice in the sense that, one, just to see how much of an impact he'd made on all these people, but also we were able to use lots of pieces of the film as different interstitial videos that I worked with his team on making. So we took the documentary apart and made kind of a love letter from him to his family, one from him to his caregivers, one kind of a recap of his life's work and his call to action. We even did a really powerful thing at the end where there's a pivotal scene in the film where Adi is losing his voice. And so he asks the audience to do a call and response with him and says, "My voice is weak, but together we can be louder." And he does that with the audience in the film. And we had this idea of maybe we should do one posthumously. So that we're trying to figure out how to end the memorial service with his team at the Be Hero organization, his family. And my production company worked with them, and we kind of together came to this idea of what if we let the audience join him in one last mic check. And the event organizers had a chorus on stage, the Resistance Revival Chorus, they're called. They're really awesome. And we played that scene from the film, and Adi asks the audience in the room gathered as a memorial to chant with him. And it was a very powerful ending. But it was, really tough for me. And he was a very good friend of mine. Obviously, I spent many years of my life following him. And on one hand, it's, I feel very lucky and gratified that I was able to help amplify his voice and certainly capture that chapter of his life for his family and for the world to see. But as you can tell from my voice, it's still, it's only been a few months and I miss him a lot. And I guess it's one of the one of the hazards of documentary filmmaking is you get really close to your subjects.
Yeah.
So on one hand, I feel very, depending on the day, I feel like incredibly grateful to have done the work, and on others, just feel like I lost a friend. But his movement lives on, and I hope that folks in your audience um, will see the film next month. His wife and I are participating in an online ALS film festival, and doing a Q&A together with other films about ALS. So audiences can check that out. And of course, the film is available on Hulu and a bunch of other digital platforms. So yeah,
And
people can honor his legacy still.
what is the film festival where they can?
Yes, it is called, so it is hosted by the ALS Therapy Development Institute.
Okay.
And I will drop the URL into
Yep.
the
And we'll put
chat
it.
here.
We'll put it in our show notes.
Yeah.
I just wanted to dedicate a little, a moment to his memory. We really believe here it's important never to forget our heroes, and I think that he left such a huge hole, but he also gave us a lot to live for, and he inspired a lot of people, not just in the ALS world, but I think beyond, for how you can take something that you're passionate about and make a difference. So
Yeah. One thing I think about that film, and maybe what time, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's okay.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the moment to think about him. And I was just going to add to what you were saying, that film and this story to me is kind of a commentary on documentary filmmaking, in the sense that often documentary films can chronicle really personal challenges or trauma or pain that people experience. There's movies about sexual assault or war or environmental catastrophe, and a lot of the times, or illness, as the case of Not Going Quietly. And I think what Adi shows is that telling his story to all these people, telling it to the people in power, to us as filmmakers, to the American public and Congress, gave him a sense of power and agency despite his losing body. So I think that's a good metaphor for sometimes why it can be worth doing this work, either professionally or even just telling your own story, which all of us have in some way.
Yeah, I keep coming back to that same lesson with The Girl Who Wore Freedom. Sometimes it's incredibly disheartening when you spend all of this time working on these films and you feel like the audience or the people that it's reached is very small, because you have these big dreams and visions for where your film is going to be, and when maybe that doesn't pan out like you think it will, you do wonder, is anybody really ever going to see this? Are they ever really going to care? And I've had so many family members and friends that have been involved in the project who have been like, are you kidding me? Are you crazy? Do you see all the lives that have been touched over the 5 years that you've been doing this project, and all of the things that have happened along the way to change people's lives? And I look back and I think about it in the big picture, in the grand scheme of life. That's what's important. That's really what's important. And so documentary filmmaking for me, I've learned the process is almost more important than the result.
Yeah.
If you really care about telling a story and making a difference, then you're really going to care about the subject matters that you're talking about, and it's going to change you and those around you. So it is a very different thing than making movies for making money.
Yeah.
We all want to make money and certainly not lose money, but that hasn't been the motivation, I think, for a lot of documentary filmmakers.
Definitely. Well, you'll have to have me. I'll have to have you on the People's TV podcast to interview you about The Girl Who Wore Freedom, because we have one. It's not as we're not as regular as you are. We've only done about 10 episodes, but hopefully we can turn the tables at some point and tell that story. But one more anecdote about that is I remember specifically being with Adi, I can't remember where, somewhere in like Utah at one of these campaign events, and he only has a few months to speak, a few years to live, and every moment is precious. And we've driven 3 hours in that hot RV to get to this place, and there's like 4 people there to see him speak, and like scattered on chairs. And at the end of it, we were kind of like, "Oh, sorry, Adi, that was a bummer." And he was like, "No, not at all. Like, I got to spend so much time, and I made like deep, he said it in a funnier way, but like made deep and close connections with 4 people. Like, what's the difference between that? Then they'll go tell people, what's the difference between that and speaking to 1,000?" And I can definitely relate to that because, I've had screenings of that film and others where, gone to a festival and it's been a really small audience. And I've also had many experiences like you're talking about, Christian. I mean, Not Going Quietly, I think, reached a big audience, but not as big as I thought it deserved, because I think Adi is like, one of the great figures of our time and it should be seen as much as, the Obama documentary or whatever other one that might have gotten wider distribution. And certainly with my past films, really struggled. And I'm sure every documentary filmmaker in the audience can relate to that. And so I do think it's important to, remember that touching one life is really meaningful. How you treat people in the process is really important. And also just to like pick it back up and go again with your next film. I think shifting into some of the industry talk, like this is a really, really, I think, challenging profession to be in. I speak a lot at, not a lot, but sometimes I'll be invited to schools and things like that. And I wouldn't say I caution people against becoming a documentary filmmaker, but I try to help set expectations for what that is like and how it can be sustainable and reach people. And I have a lot of thoughts on why that's the case and what's wrong with the industry, but I know that's not, exactly what the
well actually that is, we do talk a lot about that on this podcast. We've had several different people on because I, like you, am here to educate and really want people to understand the pros and the cons of going into this industry. And if you're going to do it, how can you be successful professionally and personally? I mean, there's just so much involved. And I think the more information you have, the better you can be as a filmmaker. And, that all goes to quality of life. And I think that's kind of what we're about. And I think you're right. I think it's important to go in with your eyes open. And I really would love to have you back even another time to talk about that stuff. But for right now, you were talking about, we have moved on from Going Quietly. We are here to talk about Mented, which is a very different subject, completely different subject. And this film, when I watched both of them way back when, this one really sparked my imagination because it was a new subject for me. I had remotely heard of NFTs. I didn't really understand them. I have to say that your film was very good at educating me, which I give you big points for because it's a complicated subject. So before we dive in, I do have some specific questions. But first of all, I know that you have some exciting news. So let's get to that right away. So what's the latest?
Yes. Well, thanks for that intro to the film. And the movie premiered last year at the Tribeca Film Festival, which was really exciting, and then had its international premiere at the Copenhagen Documentary Festival, which is an amazing experience. I'd never been there before. It's like documentary paradise.
Yeah.
The Danish people have a much better system and audience.
Yeah.
And the screenings were packed, and there's much to be said about that. But as we're talking right now, we are inching towards the final steps of signing a distribution deal with a streamer for Minted, and that is really exciting. It's been a long road. It's been almost a year since it premiered to get that, so it was not, to be honest, for the I know that in these conversations you like to be really transparent so people understand the industry. It was not a situation, where immediately after the premiere, everybody was bidding to get the film, which is every indie filmmaker's dream. It was a long slog to convince people, okay, this subject matters. People are interested in this, even though it's non-commercial and it's a very confusing topic. But it looks like we were able to do that. And I'm hopeful by the time this episode is released, we'll be able to add a little addendum with where you can see it and what that date will be. But that's about as good as you can hope for these days for a film. Not Going Quietly did have a theatrical release where it was actually in theaters, and that was incredible. This probably won't have that, maybe because the topic is a little more specific. But, I'm really thrilled that it will be able to be seen by people. And I think that will be an opportunity to really move on. I think no filmmaker can kind of like let go until they know it's, you know,
It's
been
somewhere.
being seen.
Yeah.
It's somewhere, and it could be self-distribution, but knowing that people have a place to see it and that it's out there in the world. We work so hard on these things. I know how hard you worked
Yeah.
on your movie and what we put into them, and you need to set them out into the world in some way. So it'll be a very emotionally cathartic experience for me, frankly, to know that the film has a home and allow me to kind of keep exploring more subjects. I am working on something else, which I can tease at the end, or we'll come back and
Yay. I can't wait.
next year on that. But all the conversation about Minted though is very relevant, and I'll kind of jump ahead a little bit
Well,
on.
don't jump ahead. Don't
Okay.
jump ahead yet. Come
Okay.
on, give me a minute now.
Yes.
Okay, so
sorry.
first of all, I'd like you to give the log line, because I want to step back for a second, because I started with I didn't know about NFTs, and our audience may be lost with that. So why don't you start with the log line for Minted, and let's just catch people up about what this film is about, and then we can dive in.
Great. So I do have the log line pulled up, so I'll read it. It says, a renegade group of outsider artists are thrust into the global limelight when they embrace a powerful new technology, but they must reckon with the controversies that threaten to collapse the wild world of NFTs. And so hopefully that summarizes what is a kind of roller coaster ride through this buzzword and phenomenon that I think most people have heard of, at least the acronym NFT. Maybe nothing beyond that. Maybe they've heard a little bit about these Bored Ape cartoon monkeys selling for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars.
I'm just going to tell you, I don't think right now the people that listen on our podcast are going to know what you're talking about. Not that my audience doesn't, understand things, but this is a little small corner of the world. And I do think we ought to stop for a second. And I'd love for you to give a definition of an NFT and, just explain a little bit about what we're talking about.
Yeah, that is a good place to start. And I'm glad you're interrupting me, because it can get easy to plow forward into this world. And it is
You are very familiar with this, but the rest of us need to catch up.
Yes. So the entry point that most people have to NFTs comes from cryptocurrency. At this point, most people have heard about Bitcoin and this idea of digital currency that can be sent from person to person without an intermediary. There's, of course, a lot of controversy about Bitcoin itself. Some people think it's a great tool that will free us from the oppressive central governments that issue our currency. And there's other people who think it's a scam and it's the dark market and it's used by drug dealers and for terrorism financing and things like that. And as with most things, I think the truth, of course, is both or somewhere in between. But NFTs arose from the phenomenon of cryptocurrency as the idea of a token, much like a Bitcoin is a token that represents money. An NFT is a token, a digital asset or string of code that can represent something in the real world and can be sent or exchanged to people like a Bitcoin can. And the main phenomenon that an NFT came to represent is this digital token representing art. And it's a token that you can own or send to somebody else. And it's a sort of simple idea on the surface that we should be able to own our digital assets and exchange them. But it's actually something that wasn't really possible before this technology that some people may have heard of called the blockchain. And the film takes audiences piece by piece through this. We actually use definition cards in the movie because literally we couldn't figure out how to convey these ideas cinematically. And so for all of those reasons, we walk the film. You really need to see the film to answer your question.
It's very hard. I know I'm asking you to do things without visuals that are hard. I do want to try just to tease this out a little bit. So I do think, people are, you'd have to live under a rock not to know what's going on in our political world right now. And I do think that I remember a couple of years ago, maybe, that Donald Trump did have some NFT trading cards,
Yes,
right?
he did.
So there may be people that are familiar with these trading cards that he did. And so perhaps they can understand, that'll give them some frame of reference of what an NFT is. And basically, it is a picture or an image. And we know many people have been online, and that you can do a screenshot, or you can, download and copy a picture. And all of a sudden you think you can own that. But really, anybody could do that. And so it's hard to imagine that one person can own one piece of art in the computer world without everybody else having access to it. But that is
Yes,
what your movie does, is it goes to explain how one piece of art can live in this cyber world and only belong to one person,
exactly.
individually, and its value be worth $69 million or
Yeah.
billion or whatever it is. And so this movie, it is very complicated, and you had to figure out a way to tell it. And that was one thing that I was very impressed with. It feels like this giant octopus or another, or some sort of hurricane or tornado that you
Yeah.
wrestled into a story. And so the first thing I want to know is, how did you discover this story? And then the second one is, it seemed to me you had incredible access. So how did that happen? Tell me those two things. How did you
Yeah.
discover it, and how did you get all that access?
Yeah. That was a great description, and hopefully of NFTs and of the phenomenon. And I studied before documentary film specifically in college. I actually studied digital art. I was in called new media at the time, which was the idea of interactive sculptures and code as art. And I was really interested in a kind of experimental video art. Maybe people have heard of like Namjoon Paik and other famous video artists who are not really documentary filmmakers, but made kind of museum quality art, but on screens. And that was still a kind of rare and different and unusual phenomenon. It wasn't common, and this is talked about in the film, in the 90s, to go to a museum and think that there could be art on a screen, a piece of digital art. That phenomenon arose later and actually ultimately coincided with the rise of NFTs. And I myself realized how difficult it was to make a living as a digital artist, and so switched into the lucrative field of documentary film instead, because that world. But I'd always been interested in the careers of digital artists, and one of the kind of contemporaries that I was interested in was the artist Beeple, who his real name is Mike Winkelman. And he, in around the year 2020, started experimenting with NFTs, and was one of the earlier artists who was kind of already had a following to experiment with this. And
And you open the movie with him.
Yes, yes,
which is very compelling.
Yes, the movie opens with his jaw-dropping $69 million sale of this NFT of his work. And it's important for audiences to know that his style is very irreverent. It's not. It's these kind of often grotesque warping of pop or consumer ideas. It's silly. It's playful. Sometimes it's gross. And he had been doing this art every day for 15 years and decided to make his entire 15-year oeuvre of work into one single NFT. So it wasn't just one piece of art he made in one day that he sold. It was his 15-year kind of masterpiece. And right at this time, there had been, as the pandemic kicked off, there was this kind of gold rush around cryptocurrencies and the market in general. And suddenly his auction was picked up by Christie's auction house, which is a very mainstream traditional auction house, been around for hundreds of years, selling Picassos and Warhols and other things that you might think of being worth that amount of money. And everybody scratched their head and said, well, how could this digital art thing be worth that? But lo and behold, it was, and a very rich crypto investor, bought the piece for $69 million, making Beeple the third highest living artist of all time, or in the world, and highest selling living artist in the world. And so that sent these ripples through the industry and about the arrival of NFTs. And around the same time, I got connected with a producer on my project who was really interested in telling this story and helped connect me to other people in the blockchain world who helped provide financing as we moved into production. And we started together right around that time. It was still very early in this NFT phenomenon, reaching out to different artists that were experimenting with NFTs. And you see those becoming the characters in the film. The main ones are Latasha, who is a music video artist and rapper, Justin Aversano, who's a photographer and does this incredible portraiture work on medium format cameras, and also Karina, an artist in Cuba, as well as a couple of other artist characters in the film. And at that time, it was fairly easy to get connected to and get access to those folks because, like most artists, they want to be featured and want to have their work and story promoted, and we wanted to tell their story. But what happened that was so incredible was that from that time where they were kind of accessible and little known, we watched as this technology and this platform completely changed their lives and fortunes. And some of them, like Justin, by the end, were also, $1 million artists like people. And we got to
But
follow
what's
that
so
journey.
amazing to me, this is what's crazy. This does not often happen, where you are at the right place at the right time to catch the beginning and the end of a story, in a sense. Like, you were there right at the very beginning, like a little bit before everything popped, and you watched all of this stuff happen.
Yeah.
That was crazy.
We didn't know. It wasn't that clear. It looks, I think when you watch a good film, it feels like that. And it looks like it. Wow, you were there at the beginning and there at the end. But it's not really that simple. Like, as we were doing it, we didn't know what the end was. We still, and I think to be fair, we still don't know what the end of this story is. It's like any film. It's hard to know where it ends. But as we, and I can talk more about the process of selecting the artists and winnowing down which ones made it in the edit. But we had, many hundreds of hours of footage, as these projects often do. And it was in that, it took us about a year to edit the film. We were really editing while we were shooting. And then we would see things happen in the real world or with our characters that we realized was going to change the ending. And so we had to go shoot more. But ultimately, what happens in the film, inevitably to some extent, is that this meteoric rise of this market has kind of comes crashing down to reality when the broader market crashes, and that ends up changing the fortunes of some of the artists. Of course, have to persevere past this, much like any artist does. And so once that happened and we realized that we had the bookend, we were able to craft that story that has that kind of symmetry that you're talking about. But I think, it wasn't so much being in the right place at the right time and more kind of figuring out what that arc was in post-production.
Yeah, because that's how I have struggled. My stories have always been, it has been difficult to weave together the beginning, the middle, and the end. And it does seem, watching your story, it's pretty cut and dry, so it is, I'm interested in this messy middle, because one of my questions here was, it was woven together so well, and it seemed like everything fit. It was a complicated subject, but A, you made it easy to understand. And B, you did have access. I mean, like, you went all over the place with this movie. So first of all, you must have had a pretty good budget. B, it must have taken you some time to film, because there was time for things to happen over the course of a set period of time. So talk to me a little bit about all of those details.
Yeah, no, we were really fortunate to have a great team of supporters and funders who helped, put together support for the film, and have the resources to shoot in different countries. Some of the shoots Well, I'll just give an example, like the Nigeria portion of the film. There's some characters that are making NFTs in Lagos, Nigeria, and we didn't have the budget to go there, but we found a great crew there, and I remote directed them from here. So we were
Oh,
able
that's
to,
great.
yeah, we kind of made a style guide and worked really closely with a local crew because it was too much in excuse me, it was too much in too many places at a time. I did get to go to Cuba for the film,
I
which
was
was really
wondering if you went there.
exciting. Yeah, I went in April of 2022 to film with Karina, who is this incredible
That story is
painter.
so unbelievable.
Nice, thank you for saying that. She's obviously one of my favorite characters in this because she embodies this idea that NFTs can be something beyond just money. Her story, for folks who haven't yet seen the film, is that she experiences censorship from the government of Cuba, who doesn't allow her to show her political anti-revolution, anti-Castro. You might interpret it as messages um, in her work, and they literally make her cover up her paintings. And she says, "Well, I don't need to do that. I can use NFTs to sell my work abroad," and is able to do that and ultimately save up so much money that she can finally achieve her dream of leaving Cuba with her daughter. And so that story, though, by way of example, I wasn't able to go back to Cuba the second time, so we hired a local crew to follow up, and that's how we had to do these multiple character stories with Adi and Not Going Quietly. I was able to just kind of stick with him. But this one, and it's a much different process, and honestly, a much harder process to try to
Yeah.
tell a more macro story like this.
Yeah, plus you're also releasing control. Like I've talked to, I've gone and shot over France, obviously, numerous
Yeah,
times. And even just going there, but not taking my own team and hiring crew there, there's an element of you don't have your crew and you're trying to get used to, new people. I can't imagine the challenge of directing just, you have a crew in Africa that you don't know and that
I
you're
know.
directing them from where you're sitting.
It
That's,
hasn't always gone well, and I have had bad experiences too. The Africa crew is great, but yeah, that's a balance. You have to get on if you really want to have control. You got to get on a plane and go. And this comes up a lot in our commercial work, but yeah, we were able to try to really keep our finger on the pulse with what was happening with these artists. And we knew that it was important to be with the characters, as the movie is ultimately about not just it's about these artists, but it's told through this framing device of this market phenomenon, this incredible bubble that takes place over the course of a year and that inevitably bursts. And we knew that we wanted to see those moments from the artist's perspective. We didn't just want to have interviews with them, and so it was important to do those follow-ups. What was really hard was knowing which artists we were going to feature more prominently. We did film, there's sort of four main characters, Beeple, Justin, Karina, and Latasha, and we selected them ultimately because they had such interesting and varied stories, perspectives, reasons for getting into NFTs, personal adversity and challenges that they'd overcome, but more importantly, they worked in these very different mediums, from this kind of people's funky digital art. Justin does this old timey traditional photography. Latasha is doing music videos and hip hop. Karina's a painter. And so we wanted to have diversity of location and demographics and look. But we didn't, now those people seem like perfectly chosen, like kind of like everything looks so neat when you see it finished. But the truth is that we didn't know while we were filming who our main characters would be. And that made it really hard.
Yeah, so let me ask you this. That was true for me with The Girl Who Wore Freedom. And there's so many things that ended up on the cutting room floor that really crushed my heart. What I found is that, we spent a lot of time filming people and interviewing people. And where I was filming in particular, people were not too happy if they gave me that time and if they interviewed with me and they did not end up in the film. Did you have that experience? And if so, how do you deal with that? Because I felt terrible guilt.
So that is a really tough situation, and I'm certain that's the case, on this project and others. That, and even people who are featured maybe weren't featured enough or don't feel they got out what they put in. And, I think it's important to try to be transparent with participants, and the relationship between participants and documentary filmmakers in general can be really complicated. Um, it certainly was on this project, and even with Adi Barkan, it was, in terms of who has control and who's telling the story and all of that kind of trust, that I'm sure you experienced as well. Um, Little things that I think are, important is, one, to just set expectations about how much they'll be in and their story, and what you're trying to achieve. And the second thing that you can do is, share a clip with them so they can use it for themselves, or some images, things like that is like a nice trick, just to show that you care about that person, because ultimately they have to understand that your primary objective is to tell a story and tell a good story, and there's no way, you might do a 3-day shoot with somebody and only use 20 seconds of it, or not at all. And as
Yeah.
you grow as a filmmaker, I think you try to avoid that. But yeah, I think, basically honesty, transparency, and then also, whatever you can do for those folks. One very minor thing we did in this is that if you go to the special thanks in the credits, we gave a thank you to every single person that we interviewed or featured at all. So at least they're credited as having contributed to the film,
Oh,
even
that's
if they
great.
didn't make it on screen. So, I can't say that nobody on this project or my other projects is disappointed about how how much they were featured, but I try to do my best
Yeah, it's very hard to
to
make those decisions for sure.
yeah.
So, one thing I want to talk to you about is I've experienced a lot of fear and doubt in the middle of these big projects. I feel like the creative process starts off something like, oh my gosh, this is such a great idea. Isn't this an awesome idea? Let's make this film, and you start with this, and then all of a sudden it doesn't feel so great anymore, or you lose the energy or the point of it or the money or whatever, and it gets really discouraging. Talk to me about what you do and how you handle fear and doubt when you're in the middle of a project.
Yes. I experience it on every project, and I think it's, it may look or appear from some of the success that, these projects have had in terms of premiering at major festivals or securing distribution, that it was smooth sailing. But I think on both of these films that we've talked about together, there have been moments where I, literally thought about, giving up, even after 6 months or a year or more of work. So, like, that's really real, everything you're saying. And I think it's really common. And I'm sure that may be the case with Oscar winning films, that they just, they didn't, sometimes you just don't know if you have the footage or not. And there were plenty of, we had access to some people, but there was, times where there was something we really wanted to film and the people said no, and you're like, man, I'm giving you all this time and energy. And, for me personally, I'll think about those things for a year later. I'll watch the film now and be like, man, if they had just let me film this one thing, or if we just had the budget to go back to Nigeria. So one is just to know that, like, you're definitely not alone. And I know that for sure when I'm in those moments. The second thing is, I guess that, like, what is that Niebuhr poem, to have the serenity to know to accept the things I can't change, and the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That's like a
Yeah, it's a
very,
great one.
Adi had some sayings about that. And I think that's important, because it's not to say that you should never, sometimes some projects should be abandoned. And there are projects that I've developed and have hit these kinds of hurdles, and the hurdles have kind of, I've used that wisdom to know the difference, that, okay, actually, this project isn't right. This funder bailed on me, but the reason that funder bailed on me was because they saw something wrong with the project that I hadn't seen. And that's why I can't get this financing or not. And other times I've said, oh, you know what? All these people saying no to me, like, they're wrong. They just don't see it. And I'm going to fight through it. I'm going to use all of their I'm going to use all of this rejection to, prove to them that they're wrong. And that's ended up being the right choice.
That's what Ken Burns did. Did you hear that Ken Burns has these binders of rejection letters that he
That's
has?
amazing. No.
That he sits. Yeah, he has these binders of rejection letters that he sits on his desks, and like recent rejection letters, not like ones from far away,
Wow.
to just kind of remind him of this process. And I'm like, oh my word. If
I
that's
love that.
what,
Did he tell you that? I know you had him
yeah,
on, right?
yeah, I did have him on. He didn't tell me that then. I actually took his master class. This was when I had already decided to make a documentary, and I thought, I really don't know how to make a documentary. Maybe I should take a class. And so I was looking up how to make a documentary, and that came up. I was like, well, I'll take that. Actually, all I needed to do was watch the introduction. It was pretty amazing. But he says this in the introduction. I thought that was great.
Yes, that's awesome. I did not know that story about him, but that proves my point exactly, right? You always hear about, the Beatles getting turned down for their first record deal, or Michael Jordan, whatever,
Right.
But to
Getting
hear it
cut
from
from his
Ken
10th
Burns,
grade basketball team.
that's it. Yeah, I mean, and to hear Ken Burns saying that now, is relevant. It's definitely true for me. I mean, this movie got into Tribeca, did not get into South by Southwest, and my last film did. The distributor who did that movie, and said they love my work and you would want to continue supporting, thought this one was, this wasn't a fit for that particular distributor. I'm not going to throw shade at them. So, there's of course, every film is different. They're not under any obligation to keep supporting, but every film has its own challenges. And I think a lot of things get easier as time goes on for me in my career, and doors open, but certainly other ones close. And it's also harder to take as many risks now as a filmmaker, because I've, getting older. I've got a kid. I have now I have I have employees at our production company, and I got to make payroll every month. And so, on one hand, maybe you get rejected less because you've advanced a little bit, but you have more needs and it's harder to pull favors from everybody. When I first started making my movies, it was just like, everybody, come on, get on board this crazy train and we'll figure it out later. And don't worry about, what it's going to get paid. I'm not going to get paid anything, but we're going to get to Sundance, and it's all going to be amazing. And I don't, I'm a lot more practical now. And I do think that sense of freedom and exploration really helps with making good films, and it's important to try to hold on to that. And I think it's harder as you make more and more projects. This is now my third or fourth project, and as I look at my next one, I find myself thinking, well, working backwards, where's the audience, and who might distribute this, and what festivals, and where can we? And that's not where creativity comes from. It comes from that inspiration. So you got to retain that childlike wonder, which is hard.
Yeah. That is what happened to me in this process, where I realized after you get all the way to the end, it does not make logical sense to start filming anything unless you think backwards.
Yeah.
Where is this going to go? Where will it fit? Who would distribute it? What audience would watch it? Where do I want it to be? All answering all of those questions before you even begin. It's so much more fun to begin at the beginning of what story do I want to tell? Or, ooh, this is an amazing story. Can I tell it? Ooh, let's see who else would want to go along on this journey. Like, it's so much more fun to do that, but it's honestly really not that practical. It's much more, business savvy, I think, and better to at least have that end discussion before you begin. But it also saps some of the joy of it, maybe.
Yeah. Well, definitely with these kinds of independent films, we're all producers and directors. None of us have the luxury of, I'm just going to do the creative part and let, my manager do the business side of it. Maybe, it sounds like even Ken Burns is, submitting his own cuts and, probably handling a lot of that stuff. So, maybe when you make it, you can just put on that blinders and say, I'm just going to make what I want. And I do think the best art gets made that way. And when I met Adi for example, I really, and to some extent this project too, I just kind of dropped everything and I was like, this is interesting. And I'm going to go with my gut and I'm going to follow this. And it's rare that that happens. It's only every couple of years. And I think there's more as there's more, I hear cool ideas and I think that'd be a film. And as I get older, I'm more like, but maybe this, maybe that. There's more red flags. There's less appetite for like, let's go. But that's all to say that, I still think, I know we've done quite a bit of, like, I don't want to say complaining, but like a bunch of, talking about the challenges of the industry. I do think being a storyteller, being a filmmaker, probably going back to like the caveman campfire or
Yeah.
the shaman in the village is like a very privileged and lucky position to be. And I think it was always kind of probably the madman or the person with, on the spectrum or on, the spiritual quest or whatever, who was the one who wanted this particular role in a society. So I know that's getting kind of heady about it, but I say it because it's important to remember, how fortunate and lucky you are to be able to just talk to other people about their story and to interview people and bring out people's humanity. It's really, there's nothing else I'd want to do.
Well, me either. And I think storytelling changes the world. I mean, we learn by story, by example. And I think there will always be storytellers. And I think it's important to have storytellers, particularly storytellers with a good heart, that want to share, teach, inspire. And so I certainly want to encourage people to continue to pursue their passions and to tell their stories. But I do think it's important that you learn as much as you can in order to be able to tell them and to succeed. I have two more questions for you. One of them is, were you able to break even or even make a little bit money for your next documentary? Because everybody always hears, documentaries never make money. And I'm still at the point where I'm almost breaking even on my first one, but I'm not quite there yet.
Kudos to you for that. That's incredible. I know none of my projects have that we've talked about have made more in revenue than their budget, and that is that's the fundamental challenge for all of this industry, is that these are quite expensive to make, and for the most part, with the rare exceptions, the buyers are not paying certainly not big premiums for investors. Yeah, it's gotten harder actually, even since we talked last, over the last couple of years. That being said, it's not all doom and gloom. A couple things that people can and are doing is to try to like piecemeal their rights up so that some different territories or different buyers. Of course, the big exciting thing, and I know you've done some of this, is that people can really take charge of their own marketing and distribution in a way that wasn't possible 10 years ago when I kind of started with my first film. The gatekeepers aren't always there, and that's a big part of what Minted is about. Of course, Minted's about this specific tool for NFTs, which I don't think has really taken on any mainstream use for documentaries yet, although it might. There's been a couple of people exploring that. But it's really about artists. I'm glad we're having this discussion because it really relates to what the fundamental spirit for me about this NFT story is. It's not about this crazy technology that you've never heard of. It's about artists leading the way, trying to create the tools and create the world they want to live in, one where they're supported and empowered. And the ones in this film use this thing, others use NFTs, others use social media, which you've done a great job of. You've created this podcast, which is an amazing platform to learn more about your work and to amplify others. So I think I went off on a long tangent there, but it's
no, go ahead.
One last thing for me personally, and this is something that relates to what I mentioned about kind of talking to students, et cetera, is that for me and my career, I have not made feature documentaries the main source of financial stability. That I also make commercials.
Sure.
I make documentaries for companies generally that pay for it. I think we talked about this a little on our first podcast, but the company produces feature-length films, some of which I direct, like the two that we've talked about today. But that is sustained to some degree, even though those films do create revenue. That is somewhat sustained by the work that we do for companies that use filmmaking and social storytelling as marketing. So that's the two sides of the coin for me.
That's what I tell everybody if they want to, no matter whether it's being an actor or a voiceover artist or a photographer or a filmmaker, when you're starting out or as you're growing your business, you really need to have some source of income that's fueling your creativity to be able to, so you're not having to worry about, taking care of your family while you're able, you're trying to do your art.
And there's many ways to do this. If at the risk of repetition, it's important to me to say, because I think I want people to join up and follow their pursuits and passions in this world, but you don't have to do commercials. There's many ways to make a living in the film industry. You can be a videographer, a lighting designer, a makeup artist, a sound mixer, an editor, a podcaster. You can, there's ways that you can be adjacent to and in the industry, and you can even work on other people's documentaries. Being an editor, video editors are in huge demand right now. We have trouble, paying sometimes thousands of dollars a week for editors because they're in such high demand. And so directing is always, the most prestigious part of the process, and what gets you invited onto a podcast, which is a lot of fun. But I think that there are many crafts that you can have that are fulfilling and might give you a little bit of the latitude such that you're not expecting to make a living only as a documentary director. And I just think being honest about that, people do it and you should aspire to it. But, even Errol Morris makes commercials. So you shouldn't have any, have any feeling like you're not making it because you have that kind of day job.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, I think it's super fun to do an adjacent job simply because you're in the industry, you're meeting other people. I mean, that's the way it's been for me. Voiceover is my day job, but by doing that, I am meeting so many people in the industry that it keeps my, ear to the ground, and I meet people and I hear things and I can go to networking things. So doing some sort of adjacent job is a great idea. I did have one other question. I would be a fool or lying if I didn't say when I watched Minted, I wasn't sitting there going, what assets of my films could I break out and use as NFTs? I have so many photographs and posters and all this art we've created. Could I put those on the blockchain and could I make any money?
You definitely should. I have not done it myself yet. I own some NFTs, but I've not minted any. Of course, I always get asked this in the Q&As for the film, and I really do. The film takes a skeptical approach at them, and it shows pros and cons. But and right now, of course, the market is down. But for people who can successfully market themselves and their work, like the artists in the film, I do think it's a really interesting tool to explore. Just a story in the film that we talked about earlier, he had this collection of 100 photographs that he'd made years prior, but it had this perfect kind of collectible quality to it that made it really perfect for this. And so if you have an audience and one that wants to support you in a story, I do think that it's a really interesting playground to explore. I wouldn't come away thinking it's a panacea for artists, and you still have to get your work in front of collectors who want to buy it. That's the duality that the film explores, which is that this thing that you find confusing is really just a symptom of the broader challenges and that the art world faces in general, and that artists face, that we've been talking about this whole hour. Mm-hmm. So I definitely encourage folks to, I wouldn't be the one to tell you step by step how to do it. Some of the people in the film, as you can see, there's Latasha gives an NFT course to artists of color. And I definitely encourage people to look her up and watch some of those seminars, because that will really give you the play-by-play to mess around with it. But anything that you think is a get-rich-quick scheme probably is.
It's not. So, it's not. Yeah. It's too good to be true. All right, exactly. Last question for you. I always want to ask filmmakers, whenever I go to a Q&A, I usually never get asked the questions that I really am dying for people to ask me. Like, I want to tell a story that happened in the film, but they don't ever ask me a question so I can tell that story. So is there anything in Minted that you don't often get to share, whether it's a story or something that happened, that you can share with us?
Yeah, let me think about that. there was definitely a lot of interesting things that happened while making it.
It can be a funny story.
Yeah. I mean, I think the funny thing about the film, and this is really about the reaction to it, and less about a production thing, but I think it is sort of funny and interesting and maybe relevant to some of our discussion, is that the people who really love NFTs, and there are a lot of them in this, it's a small but very vocal group, and they think that NFTs are going to change the world, and they think that they're going to, create freedom for artists and liberate them and solve a lot of the problems we've been talking about. A lot of them saw the film and thought it was too critical and harsh, and I spent too much time on the downsides of NFTs, and gave me that feedback when they saw it. And then
it's only like at 15 minutes at the end.
Well,
I mean, there's maybe a little more.
There's different elements to the film that show a critical perspective. But conversely, if you go and read some of the reviews on Letterboxd and other stuff, a lot of them are like, I thought NFTs were really stupid until I saw this. Right.
Yeah.
And so that has been the most interesting thing. And I think when everybody watches Not Going Quietly, you love Adi. He's a hero. You're on board with him. And so for me, it was interesting to try to do something more polarizing. And I love that we've gotten that reaction where both sides are coming away with something different than what they started out as. And, that's been interesting to watch. And when we do get distribution and hopefully bring it out into the world, I'm really be interested to see what the two camps say. And I hope ultimately it brings them a little closer together, because I think you talked about how divided we are right now in general. And even this niche topic is very divisive to people. And I hope that film and films in general can bring us all a little closer together.
I do too. Well, I have to say, I was in that camp that thought NFTs are just, I don't know, it's just, mumbo jumbo voodoo talk. It's just craziness. And after watching your movie, I was like, oh, that's starting to make sense. And I think maybe there is some truth in what they're saying. I should take this a little more seriously. And so I'm definitely in that camp that learned a lot. And I'm thankful for you. I am thankful that you took the time to bring this movie to life. And I think it's going to be really interesting. Oh my goodness, that's my orange bat phone. Hang on a second.
Okay, go take it.
I don't know why that rings. It's never anyone there. Anyway, so I'm so thankful for you bringing this movie to life. And thank you so much for coming here to talk about your film and your work and your graciousness with just sharing some behind the scenes stories. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Kristen. I really appreciate everything you do to give the spotlight to filmmakers who are usually, more putting the spotlight on others. So it's really nice to have our moment in the sun. And I'm just glad to see you build a following with this and look forward to coming back with my next project.
Yeah, thank you. We can't wait to have you back. All right, everybody, that's going to wrap it up for today. Let me give you a quick update. Right now, we are in the throes of getting our first limited theatrical release off the ground. We are in 100 screens all over the United States. So we are really excited about this. The film is going to air sometime between May 30th in some places, but definitely June 5th and 6th for the 80th anniversary of D-Day. So be watching our social media, listen to our podcast, and you'll be able to hear if it's going to be in a theater near you. Additionally, if you have a small theater in your neck of the woods and you want the Girl Who Wore Freedom to come to your neighborhood, email me at Christian@Documentary First, and I will give you the roadmap for how to get The Girl Who Wore Freedom in a theater near you. Also, The Girl Who Wore Freedom, I have to announce, is about to be taking off with Delta Airlines beginning June 1st. And also, believe it or not, United Airlines. So we're super excited to announce those two things. They're going to be running for the rest of this year. So thank you very much to those two airlines. Be on the lookout for those, The Girl Who Wore Freedom, when you travel. And thank you so much for listening to Documentary First. We really hope that you will think about supporting us on Patreon. We could use your support. Patreon.com/Documentary First. And thank you to Artillery Sports for being our brand new sponsor. All right, everybody, that wraps it up for today. Thank you so much for listening to Documentary First, where we believe everybody has a story to tell and you can be the one to tell it. Bye, everybody.